Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Grzenka. Both Mark and I are from Kata School Cascadia. And Kata School is how we name Kata communities of practice all over the world. So there might be another Kata school near you. Cascadia is referring to the geographic region that is roughly the Pacific Northwest in North America. First of all, I wanted to thank AME for hosting this webinar today and the whole series. And then next, I want to introduce you to Mark Rosenthal. He's going to be our main presenter today. Mark is one of the co-founders of Kata School Cascadia, and he's got a wealth of knowledge in Kata and all things continuous improvement. You may have seen his work at the leanthinker.com. I was on many Kata School Cascadia calls. We host a call every Friday for our community before I realized I was talking to this person who I had been reading their work for years. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark for this webinar, What is Kata?
All right. As Maria said, this is part one of a six-part series about Toyota Kata. What we're going to go through today is what is this Toyota Kata thing? Where does it come from? So I'm a little bit of the background, and then maybe a little bit about how does this fit into the continuous improvement continuum that's out there, and just set us up for the rest of the series, which is really going to be stepping through some dives into the various steps. So with that, I would like to first just pose some questions for a minute or two, and just of all of you, and maybe you can answer in the chat is fine. In your organizations, what kind of culture are you striving to create for continuous improvement? And can you describe it? How would people and groups interact with each other? What would you see? What would you hear? Just really quickly, where are you trying to go?
There's a couple of notes in
Yeah,
the
groupthink,
chat.
autonomous as a goal, scientific thinking, okay. Respect, collaboration, people feel safe to share ideas, more collaboration. And as you're thinking about that, then the next question here is, what obstacles do you see in the way of that culture taking hold? Developing leaders as coaches, fear of change, interpersonal conflict, old school managers, exclamation point, communication, okay, time resources, production, not enough time. Yeah, okay. So it's just kind of to get some grounding on where we're trying to go and where we're at right now. So I think what we're trying to do is we want to build an organizational culture where problems are routinely solved at the lowest possible level. And we want to do that in ways that develop people's problem-solving skills. And I think this is kind of a little bit of a shift from the classic paradigm where we have these experts that come in and do all the problem solving for us and then turn over the solution, kind of like taking your car to the mechanic, or let me know when my process is fixed. This is a little different, and this is about how do we develop those problem solving skills in everybody. And where we want to start off is imagine I am a supervisor on a line and Maria is my immediate boss. And we've been working together to do some improvements. And maybe this is the fifth or sixth coaching cycle, and she's coming up and she's going to be checking in with me, but she's going to be using a series of questions and I'm just going to be answering them. And by the way, we haven't really rehearsed this, so it's semi-cold, so it'll be kind of interesting. Okay, so just to set the stage, we've got a storyboard, which might be on a couple of flip charts or a whiteboard in the work area. And I'm going to be trying to point and talk as we go. Okay, Maria, let's...
Okay, so in this demonstration, I am your immediate supervisor, and we're walking over to the faucet assembly process. Hi, Mark. I see that you're working on this challenge here. What is the target condition?
So my target condition is I want to hit a process metric where Alice, who's the first operator in the line, to get her lowest repeatable time to the point where it doesn't exceed 40 seconds, which is the takt time at the moment. And I think if we do that, we can start to get some stability and get our daily output to at least stable at 600 faucets a day before we kick into overtime. That's not quite what we need to do, but we need some stability first. And right now, I don't see any major changes in the operating pattern to get there.
Okay. What is the actual condition now?
So the actual condition for our daily output is the current goal is 650 a day. So that's represented by this lower red line. Ultimately, by the end of July, we need to get to 700. But as you can see, our daily output is sometimes hitting 600.
Okay. And so you're right now bouncing around.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm trying to do my target condition is at least get where we're consistently hitting 600,
Okay.
just some basic stability.
Um, Anything else about your actual condition?
Yeah, so this is the current operating pattern, which is just a block diagram, which just shows the steps in the line. And this is Alice, where I'm focusing right now. I did some time studies,
Okay.
and again, Alice is the first block here. But as you can see, the amount of variation in the timing of each step just continues to increase as we roll down line. And I think
Uh-huh.
that's just delays that are accumulating. But the lowest repeatable times, what I'm looking at here is the lowest repeatable times for everybody except Alice are below the tact and even below the planned
Hmm.
cycle time, but Alice is above it. So I think she's throttling the whole line right now. That's why I want to work on her first.
Okay. You're looking at that
Yeah,
first block first.
yeah, yeah. And this is Alice. I timed everybody for about 35 cycles. And
Okay.
and again, you can see that her variation's pretty low, but she's pretty consistently above the tact. So we're just not going to make our quantity unless we can fix this first.
Okay. What did you plan as your last step?
So my last step was finishing grasping the current condition. And so that was to look at how many people, what the math says, if we had a stable process, how many people we need.
What did you expect?
And
Mhm.
I predicted that the 4 people we have are enough to get to 650 if we can address the variations in the wait times.
Okay. And what actually happened?
So the math came out to 3.9 people. So yeah, I think 4 people are enough.
Okay. And what did you learn?
So I think we're going to, that's 4 people are enough to get to our current goal of 650 a day, but to get to 700, I'm going to need to find cycle time savings in order to get to the challenge rate of 700 a day.
Okay. So, what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching that target condition?
Well, the obvious one right now is the layout introduces 3 seconds of return time in Alice's cycle, which is actually almost enough to get her to 40. But really, the other obstacle is I don't know enough about the other details of her work cycle to really understand what's going on there.
Okay. So, which one are you addressing now?
I'm addressing that one. I need more information about Alice's work cycle.
And what is your next step?
So my next step is to do a detailed time study of Alice's work cycle.
And what do you expect?
I expect to learn about the sources of wasted motion and variation that I think we can then look at those as obstacles to getting to the 40 seconds.
And how quickly can we go and see what we have learned from taking this step?
I think we can talk about this tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Here's my question for the group is looking in your own organization, how many of your supervisors or team leaders can articulately describe their process performance and why it's performing the way it is? Minimal, none.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And what obstacles do you see are in the way of a conversation like this happening at that frontline level every day? Too busy with busy work, okay. Making time for it. How long did this actually take though, right? We were into this for like 5 or 7 minutes. Yeah. Resistance from the recipient. Recipient's an interesting term because that kind of describes something I'm giving to somebody. Too busy firefighting. Okay. Why is it the job of the supervisor and not a process tech? That's a really good question.
Hmm.
Who knows the most about the work and the people. This is motion Kaizen, which is, at least in our benchmark company, motion Kaizen is the domain of the supervisor. Okay. So again, these are kind of rhetorical questions. Maria.
Well, yeah, one thing I know I've noticed in my experience too is that amount of information in the actual condition. I feel like a lot of people don't have that level of knowledge about the process that is actually happening.
Yeah, that's a good one. And the neat thing is the third of these series, we're going to go into some depth about what that process is to get all the information that you just saw me go through. So let's go into a little bit of background on where this stuff comes from. So traditionally, by the way, any corporate training or whatever, you have to have an iceberg metaphor. It's a requirement. Um, and in this one, we look above the water, and if you look at Toyota's production system, especially back in the 90s, we all went over to Japan and we took away, here's all the stuff that Toyota's doing with mistake proofing and 5S and cellular organization and visual management. And I think we came back with the idea if we just put all those mechanics into place, then everything will work the way it works for Toyota. And these are the mechanics, and they're really easy to see. But the question here is, what are the people doing? Because that's not evident from the mechanisms and the tools. If I continue the story, when we went back to Japan and started asking, hey, wait a minute, this isn't working so well. And we got the principles, well, don't waste resources making defects, right? So the jargon word for that is jidoka. Don't waste time making stuff that you don't need right now. That's just in time. And some of the buzzwords, and this is the stuff we put on the posters on the walls. But really, where we're at is there's some fundamental values at work. We are responsible for developing our people. The best learning comes from experience. We are responsible for shaping our future. And these are the unspoken assumptions that shape the culture. And okay, yeah, visible, above the water, easy to see, below the surface, that's where the mindset, that's the thinking that's behind all of this. And where we are working today is not so much around the tools, although the tools are important. And we can talk about that at some other session sometime on how they all relate. Where we're working today is more in the people stuff and the people development stuff. A little bit of background. Toyota Kata is the result of some research. And where that originally came from is Mike Rother, who wrote the book Toyota Kata, also wrote the classic book Learning to See. And I think all of you are probably familiar with that. And what he saw back then in the 90s was that a lot of people were working on point improvements, but they didn't necessarily tie back to the system. And he and Shook and a couple of other people developed this process called value stream mapping, published it in Learning to See, and it was based on Toyota's process mapping that they call information and material flow. But that introduced value stream mapping to all of us. And the whole idea was to create some context so that improvements are addressing the barriers or the obstacles to a higher level of performance. Then what they saw was that copying the technical process structures don't really drive continuous improvement, and they have a pretty bad track record of sustaining. So the question is, what are we missing? Why does Toyota get dramatically better long-term results than everybody else? Even when Toyota goes and helps another company, they typically get better results. So Mike put together a couple of research questions. The first one was, what are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that are behind Toyota's success with continuous improvement? And then the other question is, how can other companies develop similar routines and thinking in their organizations? And notice the key word there is similar. We're not trying to copy Toyota. We're trying to understand what they do, how they think, and then ask, how can we learn to think that way? And those results were published in the book Toyota Kata back around 2009. And that's kind of when I got involved in it. When I first came across that book, that's when I started corresponding with Mike. two key patterns emerged. One was that there is a pattern for problem solving and thinking, and that pattern is taught by coaching a learner through solving a business objective or a challenge. The improvement kata, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, reflects this pattern, but it's reflecting it in an easily understood and teachable form. The difference between a Toyota Kata and what we saw at Toyota is that the kata takes it and boils it down to an easily understood and teachable form so that we can learn it faster. Mike also saw a pattern in the coaching process that also applies problem solving and thinking. So it's kind of meta here. And the coaching kata reflects that pattern. And when you heard Maria asking the questions of me, that was her following the coaching kata. Then the community started getting in process. Just to give you the rest of the history, around 2009, Mike started putting up these Improvement Kata handbooks online. Those went through 31 iterations between 2009 and 2017. And the community was basically making inputs as tens of thousands of these coaching cycles were happening over those years. And that in turn became the Toyota Kata Practice Guide, which was published in 2018, where the original book goes through the research. The Practice Guide offers a framework for practice. And to even today, through organizations like Kata School Cascadia, Kata School Northeast, and the others, we continue to learn and share, and honestly, probably even move a little beyond even what's in that book, because it's coming up on 7 or 8 years old now. Okay, so these two practice patterns. The first practice pattern we call the Improvement Kata, and it's basically 4 steps. One is we want the learner, so we have a learner and a coach. We want the learner to understand the direction or challenge. So in my example with Maria, my challenge was by July, I need to get that line to consistently producing 700 faucets a day when they're not even making 6 today. And oh, by the way, do that without any more overtime. So really what we're looking at here is questions like, what problem am I trying to solve? What am I trying to learn about in more general terms? And really, I would like us to define what solved looks like. And that's part of the process of then moving to grasp the current condition. So this was all the information you saw me go through when Maria asked, what is actually happening? That was all part of the current condition. And to establish that, I'm really, what do I know? What do I not know? Where's my threshold of knowledge? What do I need to learn about this process so I can use that information to explain why the process is performing as it is now? So I have a cause and effect. Here's where it's going on in the process, and this is why we're barely making 500 faucets a day. Then once that is understood, the learner will next establish a target condition. This is where that challenge may be on a timeline of 6 months, a year, or more, depending on the scope. The target condition is usually more around a week or 2. In this case, we had the middle of February on there, and I should have said the date when Marie asked me what it was. I always skip that myself. So where am I going next? And what obstacles do I have to overcome to get there? In other words, what do I need to learn? So we're narrowing the scope of the effort so that it's not overwhelming and we're not trying to get there all at once. So where we were in the coaching cycle we demonstrated is the learner has just established that target condition and is about to now dive in and start running what we call experiments in order to learn more or in order to try ideas. So that's now running experiments against the obstacles that are in the way toward that target condition in order to learn. So that first experiment in our example is often to get more information as I've now narrowed my scope and I know more about what I need to learn more about rather than trying to get an atomic level of detail across the whole thing. I found that very refreshing when I finally understood this because that wasn't the way I was originally taught. And this is a lot easier and a lot less stressful to do. Just to put the same steps in a different graphic, if I have my direction or challenge out here in the distance, I have my current condition some distance away from it. And I want to do is establish a target condition that is kind of like climbing a stairwell. Where's the next landing? Now, that red line represents my threshold of knowledge. This is what I know. And you see, I don't know enough yet to get to the target. And all those nasty obstacles are in the way. And so what I need to do is conduct experiments to find my way through that obstacle field one step at a time and progressively learn enough to get to that target condition. And at each step of the way, I am closing that current condition closer and closer to the target. And when I've anchored on the target condition, that's when I step back, grasp the current condition now, and then establish a new target condition and just methodically start knocking these things out. So the second piece here is we're trying to teach the learner a skill. And to master any skill, we need frequent practice. I mean, if you're trying to learn to play the piano, you need to practice every day. And probably not all day, because you'll get more out of a limited practice on one or two things. As somebody said, the way an amateur practicing free throws and an NBA player is the amateur practices free throws and the NBA player practices keeping his elbow in. We're very specific about what we're practicing. You got to have some kind of structured routine so you know what you're comparing your performance against. So how am I doing against the standard? It really helps to have a coach to give you that feedback to ensure that you're practicing the right pattern the right way. And then the learner, if this is going well, sees that they're making progress and sees that they're building competence over time. And that is what motivates them to keep with it. So the coaching kata now is the purpose there is to ask, is the learner practicing in that corridor, right, of good scientific thinking? Is what they're doing making sense? And honestly, Maria and I, that was a really clean one where the learner probably knew what they were doing. And there's lots of wrinkles we could have thrown into there where he didn't. But if the coach sees that the learner is outside of that good scientific thinking, is like jumping to conclusions without evidence, for example, that's when the coach is going to pull them back and ask some follow-up questions. And we have a teachable moment to get the thinking good. So where the learner is working to improve the process, the coach is working to improve how the learner goes about improving the process so that the learner is solving the problem and the coach is working to develop the learner's problem-solving skill. The coaching questions are designed to arrive at that understanding of where that threshold of knowledge is, and then that's going to inform the next step. That next experiment should be designed to learn to advance that threshold of knowledge in some way. I'm going to roll through the questions, and we're going to have a lot of good time for interaction, which is kind of the plan here. So these are the questions Maria asked me. So question 0 is, what is your challenge? And sometimes we ask that. But what is the target condition? And we want the learner to explain, as a minimum, what is the one thing that they're trying to work on and where are they trying to get it over the course of a week or two. Okay, compared to that, what is the actual condition now? And how do these two compare? In our example that we had, I wanted Alice's lowest repeatable time to be at 40 seconds. Her lowest repeatable time right now is at 43, 44 seconds. Right there, that defines the gap. In future coaching cycles, I would probably just focus on that number rather than giving the whole big picture, because that's really what we're working on. Then Maria asked me some reflection questions, and this is really where the learning takes place. Review, please, what we talked about last time. What did you plan to do the last time we talked? And what did you expect? And these two things are a prediction, which is the whole point of science, right? And then, okay, you ran your experiment. What actually happened? And based on that, what did you learn? What did you learn that you intended to learn? What did you learn that you didn't intend to learn? And that's really the most powerful question in the whole deck. If you imagine, even in a corporate meeting when we're reviewing action items, if we simply asked, okay, we did it, what actually happened? What did we learn? And allow that to inform the next action item, I think those meetings would become a lot more powerful. Then we ask, what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition? And really, I want the learner to tell me, what do you think is in the way? What are the problems that we need to solve or you need to solve in order to operate the way you say you want to operate? And then of all of those, which one are you addressing with the next experiment? Because we want to tackle one problem at a time rather than trying to take on everything. And if we're having this conversation every day, that actually speeds us up rather than slowing us down because we get things knocked out, we get them anchored, and then we move on based on what we learned without outrunning our headlights. Okay, so based on that, what is the next thing you're going to do? What is your next step? What is your next experiment? And what do you expect to learn from taking that step? So what I said was I need to learn more about Alice's work cycle because I don't know all the timing and details. So my next step was to get out there again with the stopwatch, but really divide up and look at all of the stuff she needs to do to put that faucet together and understand really where's the time going beyond the parts where she's actually screwing the thing together. And then how quickly can we go and see? And I like that we, because the coach probably doesn't know either what we've learned from taking that step, which really is just scheduling the next conversation. Ideally, we want these to be a minimum of every day, and the idea would be it would be at the same time every day. But hey, it might be a time when the learner says, hey, I'm going to get this knocked out in an hour. I'm going to be excited. Come back and let me share what you've learned. And we might even do it more than once a day if that's the case.
Hey, Mark, before we move on to the next
Yeah,
slide, I'm
yeah.
wondering if we could maybe just go back and point out some of these things, like the gap you were pointing out on the actual condition to the target condition, and then maybe the learning from the last step.
Let me roll back. Okay, so here is the storyboard. So Maria's first question was, what is your target condition? So now we have a little context. My process metric, right? Think of that as the independent variable. This is the thing I'm trying to adjust, is the lowest time of Alice's cycle, the thing she has to do every time. And right now that's around 42, 43 seconds, which isn't enough. My tack time is 40 seconds, so I absolutely have to get it under that. So right now I'm just working to get that down.
Then can you show me the chart of Alice's lowest repeatable time? This
When I
one.
did timing of Alice,
Mhm.
what I see, each of those dots represents the time it took her to complete one cycle. The heavy red line is at 40 seconds. That's the tack time for making 650 a day. We want her ideally to run a little faster, so she's got some headroom for variation, and that's the 34 seconds, the dotted line.
Okay. So that's the gap that you're working to
Yeah,
close. What did you learn
yep.
in your last step?
What I learned in my last step is really reflected. Well, actually, what I learned in my last step was more from the observation, was that there's a lot of walking in her
Okay.
cycle, and there's probably some time there, but really,
Do you want to show the experiment you ran?
yeah, I should. That'd be easier to answer rather than making it up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the last step, when I did the math, if I add up all of the lowest repeatable times, that's the time it takes to make one faucet, and I divide that by my planned cycle time, that tells me how many people I really need. And I have 4 people on the line, and the math says I need 3.9. So what I learned there is this is not a problem with not enough people. This is a problem with there's too much friction that's eating their time, too many time alligators.
Okay. So what are you going to do next?
So my next step now is based on the obstacle is I still don't know the details of Alice's cycle other than the 3 seconds of walking is obvious. I still need to understand what else is going on. So now I'm going to go back out and I'm going to get all of the really
Okay.
detailed work of the timing and the breakdown of Alice's work cycle so I can know where that 42, 43 seconds is actually going.
Okay. And then I asked you, how quickly can we see what we've learned here? And you said
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah. The hypothesis of Toyota Kata is that we can teach a rigorous problem-solving mindset if we give them an opportunity to practice. So that our habitual response to an unknown is to start stepping through these steps and having the coach help us. I'm going to kind of end the share for a bit, and I think we got some time, so let's get the discussion going.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got a few questions in the chat. And so there was a question from Pavel about what should a coach do every day if the experiment to overcome the next obstacle requires a lot of resources or takes several weeks to complete? You know, if it takes a lot of resources or a lot of time, what we teach coaches to do at that point is to help break it down into smaller steps. So like Mark said, that was an ideal coaching demonstration, but if he would have said something and said, "Oh, we can find out, you know, in 3 weeks," then as the coach, I would have said, "Okay, well, let's take a look at this step and maybe down into
What
something
can we do?
smaller."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What can we do tomorrow?
Okay. Second part of Pavel's question. So the learner's going off to do a step, and during this period, should the coach accompany the implementation of the experiment?
As a coach, I'm going to listen very carefully to what that experiment is, and I'm going to make sure that it sounds like they know what they're doing. Because it's very frequent and typically very small, as Mike puts it, the blast radius of failure is pretty small too. And so there's always going to be learning whether they did it right or not.
Mhm.
But if they're totally stumped and they're not sure what to do next, then okay, let's go see, and we'll absolutely do this shoulder to shoulder, and we'll work it together. It's going to depend on what the learning style is, what the coaching style is, and what that relationship is.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
hi,
wanted,
Mark.
there was an early question from Jennifer, and she wanted
Yeah.
to know, could a tech play the role of coach for another tech?
Oh, good question. Very frequently, the people who bring this into a company are the CI folks, probably most of you. And so they often are the ones who are acting as those first coaches. But I think important to keep in mind that you want to develop those middle managers, those frontline managers as the coaches. If you can get them to do it, it helps to have them as learners first, where they're the ones actually going down and maybe working side by side with the supervisor so they learn to build the storyboard and they learn to develop a reference pattern for what good answers are. A lot of that is case by case dependent. I have to start where they are. But at the end of the day, those CI folks should be working themselves into the role of what we call a second coach or a coach who's coaching the coach, so develop their coaching skills. If nobody knows any of it, then work together. And this is one of the things we talk about almost every Friday in our Friday Zooms is how do we structure that sort of thing? And really, I wish there was an algorithmic answer that works every time, but there isn't. It's kind of depending on the organizational dynamics. Did I answer the questions? Because I kind of riffed a bit.
Yes, there's the
Okay.
answer. Yes, you answer the question.
Okay.
I guess mine, does the coach have to be intimately knowledgeable of the process in order to be a coach?
No, the coach has to be intimately knowledgeable of the process of improvement. Because I do this all the time, right? I'm an external consultant. I go into companies where I don't know a dang thing. But if I can coach the learner through being able to explain to me what's going on well enough that I understand it, they have to learn a lot more about it to be able to explain it to somebody else. So actually, it almost helps for the coach to be a little ignorant if the coach is also very curious.
Thank you, Mark. The questions are just pouring in.
I want to go all the way up
Yeah.
to that because I got a general question early
Yeah.
on about your view if the Toyota concept is foundation based on upon TWI methods taught by Deming. So I think I'm gonna paraphrase here to be like, how does
Yeah.
Toyota Kata fit into the other foundational principle
Okay.
concept?
We say continuous improvement. And the operative word there is continuous. And continuous means that we're making some kind of improvement or working on some kind of improvement every single day. And that's the Toyota culture. In a lot of other companies, we do intermittent improvements where, hey, we're going to run a Kaizen event and we batch all the improvements into 1 week. And if I look back around, what's the experience? Hey, we want all of our people to be in 2 Kaizen events a year. Great goal. You got to run a bunch of Kaizen events to do that. But the only people who get good at improvement are the people who are running the events. The people who are in the events spend 5 days practicing improvement, and they spend the other 48 weeks a year as business as usual. So what are they practicing every day? That's what they're learning. So the key here is we want to get this cycle going, especially at the tactical level on a daily basis. Ultimately, I see a few companies I've worked with get to the point where they incorporate the thinking pattern into almost every conversation they have at any level about any kind of problem. Even if you don't hear the script, you can recognize the pattern. That's the goal.
Another earlier question, how does this relate to A3s? That question's from Joe.
Yeah, and there's another one that just popped up. This is A3 is where this came from, but A3 is not a form to fill out and it's not something done solo. A3 is a daily or very frequent coaching conversation, and the coach in an A3 conversation is asking some form of the questions that you heard Maria asking. I would refer you to John Shook's book, Managing to Learn. That's published by the LEI. That came out before Toyota Kata did. That book is awesome because he's running 2 columns. One is from the perspective of the learner and the other from the perspective of the coach. And the coach is working to develop the learner's problem-solving skills. And you can see the same pattern. So if you want A3 to work, you have to develop coaches. And so what Toyota Kata does is works to help you develop those coaching skills that then make you much better A3 coaches.
This is from Pavel again. Where should one start in an organization that has a poor track record of solving problems in the A3 format? And there's more parts to this question. How can a coach learn the kata of coaching if they have not previously solved problems in the A3 format? And at what level of leadership should one begin practicing the kata of coaching?
I'll start with that one. Any level you want. I'm going to put a plug in here, join a community where you've got at least some kind of emotional support. Hey, join us on every Friday at our calls. We're going to put up a QR code. You can click on that if you want to. I would say the analogy I used a long time ago, I put an analogy of A3 as a T-38 jet trainer, right? It's a little supersonic plane, but the coach is in the back seat and the student pilot's in the front. But that's not where you'll learn to fly. Where you learn to fly is in a Cessna. And think of Toyota Kata as the beginning structure that you can use in order to learn the foundational stuff before you start moving into some of the more advanced, more fluid approaches, which typically are more A3-like.
All right, ready for the next question from
Sure.
Hector? Is Alice being developed for self-criticism?
So Alice, to be clear, Alice is not the learner. Alice is one of the operators. But the learner in this case is being developed for critical thinking. I'm not going to say self-criticism because that sounds kind of harsh. The coach's job is to help them build a sense of competence, to help them build a sense of autonomy, help them build a sense of help to build that relationship. If the coach is hurting any of those things, the coach is doing this badly.
I skipped one up here earlier from Ben. You can see how this applies to an assembly line, personal performance on unit build steps. How does it apply to manufacturing that is run on a machine that determines the speed of the workers?
Once we grasp the current condition, that's going to come out. And the answer is it would be so situational. Let's go see, and we're going to have to go down to your line and understand what's really going on. And it depends on what the challenge is, what problem are you trying to solve. If you're looking at machine reliability, it's a different issue than if it is that the machine doesn't run fast enough, for example, or yield is a different problem as well.
Yeah.
So we'd have to really understand what the challenge is and then look at grasping the current conditions so we understand why that gap between the challenge that we want to achieve and where we are now in terms of performance, why that's actually happening.
Okay, I think I found one more question from Daniel. Do we want to cascade these kata events down to the operators to help solve problems?
So Yeah, and wouldn't necessarily start that way. If you go back to learning to see, on a future state value stream map, you have these little Kaizen bursts, which are the changes we need to make in order to get to the future state. Every one of those then becomes a challenge for a learner who owns that box. So, for example, one thing in the is we need to get the a changeover down to under 10 minutes. Okay, so whoever owns the process of that changeover is going to get a challenge. Let's get that changeover to 10 minutes. Okay, what's the current condition? Where is that time going? And then we can drop into SMED and coach them through it. So there is a cascade, and that's at the value stream level. And that's how the two link together.
Okay, we've got another question. If your business CI culture has PQVC or SQDCP or whatever combination of
Yeah.
words, do you think it's okay to sneak in the kata coaching questions during the daily huddle?
Yes, absolutely. That would be the thing I would do is don't try to force a new language or a new jargon in if the current jargon works. But the example I use for DMAIC folks, right? What sources of variation are preventing you from reaching your goal and which one are you addressing now? Boom, I'm doing Six Sigma.
Good, good. I saw Jennifer's reaction, so I think that was a good answer.
Okay, we have at least one takeaway there.
Missed any questions? I think I got them all.
I'm going to just put this back up so we get the rest of it. If you want to join our Friday Zooms at noon Pacific and noon 30 Pacific, Kata School Cascadia, we answer questions just like this. Come join us on Friday, drop in and ask whatever question you want. If you're interested, there's a QR code there or a URL, or you can just write to any of us. Okay, I appreciate everybody's time, and we will see you, I believe, on the 18th for part 2.